Lovely. Thanks, Rosie. And thanks everybody for joining. Yes, as Rosie said, this is a joint event for the UK Terrestrial Evidence Partnership of Partners, Partnership of Partnerships, as well as the Spotlight series. So I'm going to be talking about how we're looking to increase biodiversity monitoring at multiple scales, specifically through some of our local change work. We're going to be talking a little bit about the national scale, so some of the national monitoring schemes where we're partnering with numerous ENGOs on, as well as the local scale. And when I say local scale, I might be talking about site level or landscape scale, something like a project across an AONNB, like the work of the Chiltern's National Landscape, which is an example of a project, the Tracking the Impact project I'll get onto a little bit later. But just so when I say local or multiple scales, we're talking about a number of things in there, but anything that's basically downscaled from those national monitoring schemes. So UK TEPoP, we have several events for this autumn's festival, things that you can watch back that have already happened, and a couple more on the 19th and the 25th of November. So do check out those and come along for those, or watch the recording back also on our YouTube site for those. So just a plug for some of the other UK TEPoP work. But again, I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of that national biodiversity monitoring, maybe telling everybody who's already here things that they already know, but just in case, kind of regrounding ourselves and where we sit with those national monitoring schemes, then talking more about multiple scales and how we kind of break that down from the national scale to more local monitoring and what that enables us to do, hopefully, or what we're looking for that to do for generating more evidence for policy and generating more evidence for users on the ground. So we'll look at what that local scale means, as well as some of the progress to date that our partners have done and we've done through NCEA and some of other work around this local monitoring, and what we want to do next, and what the future maybe holds, and some questions to pose to people so you can be part of the conversation as well. So for anybody less familiar, or for all of you who are very familiar, across the UK, the primary sources of national species evidence are these species monitoring schemes through which volunteer citizen science collect really huge quantities of data. All these logos on the screen represent the schemes that JNCC partners with a range of NGOs, institutes, and the governments to fund and deliver. The 4 country nature conservation bodies invest in these schemes through JNCC and are also actively involved in the steering and advisory groups for those schemes. Bringing those groups together in 2017 is UK TEPoP, the UK Terrestrial Evidence Partnership of Partnerships. So you can see all the organizations that support, deliver, fund, and help deliver the hugely successful schemes that we do have here. So that represents all the national citizen science species monitoring and all its funders, partners, and organizers. They have a very long history and provide a very impressive long-term monitoring data and evidence. Most produce trends for official statistics, UK biodiversity indicators, and contribute to policy decisions and support country initiatives, as well as the global biodiversity frameworks. The current UK biodiversity indicators are designed to track progress towards the HE targets of the Convention on Biological Diversity and form a key part of UK CBD reporting. So it's reporting on national levels and international levels as well. There's really no alternative source for this information at the equivalent scale. It's still very efficient, and it really delivers the highest quality standard, relying on citizen science, which is seen because they do form official statistics and these UK biodiversity indicators. But it relies on citizen science, really devoted, highly trained, highly skilled volunteers. We talk a little bit about the structured schemes, and those have a really large annual sample, over 15,000 locations, again, delivered through volunteers. Though it's not free, really represents significant value for money to get all of that data, and to organize all those people is a huge amount of work as well. But we also deal with some more unstructured data as well through these schemes. And through this work, through the multiple scales and multiple approaches to biodiversity monitoring, we're also looking at the integration of that structured and unstructured data, and how that influences some of our work in the multi-scale monitoring as well. But this audience largely knows all of that, and how that data is used and how it's applied in policy, or have examples of that as well. So what we really are looking at is with all of that, with all the benefits of these long-term, really highly efficient monitoring schemes, we want to understand better the trend of decline of biodiversity and how we can reverse that curve of biodiversity loss. So how can we use all these benefits? How can we use these really efficient monitoring schemes to get more finer scale understanding of trends of the biodiversity decline? So again, citizen science is really the only way that we have to monitor this. And so it's sort of our best approach and the approach that we're using for this increase in biodiversity monitoring we're looking at. And there's a couple of things that we really want to do in order to bend the curve on biodiversity loss. We want to be able to predict the impact of policies on the species curve and detect change in habitat condition, which can also relate to ecosystem service provision. And in order to do these things, we're identifying more local change detection and kind of early signals of change to be able to inform that, or to be able to see trends as they might be happening faster on than the scale of the national schemes can provide. So multiple scales. It's all about understanding that finer scale biodiversity trends and to measure the change of nature recovery. We've had a little bit of work going on to date, both again in the Natural Capital and Ecosystem Assessment project, which is the one that I manage, the NCEA, as well as with things like the Terrestrial Surveillance Development Analysis Group, which is also part that our UK TEPoP partners participate in, and then also looking at our ongoing work again. So our approach has been thinking how we can use those really robust national monitoring as the foundation for thinking about multiple scales, providing the support to drill down to or scale up from local monitoring and local change detection. So again, we're pursuing this through multiple projects, one of which is that NCA program, which is supported by DEFRA. It's in partnership with the Environment Agency, Forest Research, Natural England Q, UKCEH. We've just come to a close of phase 1 of NCEA, and we'll be kicking off another 3-year funded cycle. So we're looking at, what's the progress that we've done to date? What have our partners also produced to date? And what are we looking at into the future? What's our business as usual model into the future, also at the end of that next funding cycle? The NCEA is also England specific. It's key to note. So some of this work has been focused in England specifically, but could be applied around. And so it's also key to hear, to learn from other countries what other approaches we might be looking at, or what similar policies or similar projects are out there that we can look at and applying the same approach. So the next couple of slides, thinking about why the local change approach and why the local monitoring approach, are from a paper that should be out soon, produced by our colleague Selene Marian, as well as others on the team. This has been looking at evidence needs from a policy perspective, in which biodiversity monitoring can support decision-making or outcomes for nature. Some of the things that we've been looking at with these trends is thinking that while the national data sets are really robust and really useful for policy and for decision-making, they can be too slow or too broad to inform rapid decision-making. And we're looking at local monitoring to be able to detect those early signals of change and allowing for more adaptive management approach and possibly increasing that policy responsiveness. So here we're looking at the national monitoring and the local change monitoring and how we'd like those to be really complementary. So some of the things that are listed here on this slide and in this little figure, they'll apply to the national as well as local changes, but also show how they can kind of feed into each other. So, having local change monitoring that adheres to the same kind of standards as the national monitoring, or it follows the same protocols, that means that it can be compared to a bigger picture, or it can be compared between sites and compared between different areas and different projects. It's all comparable and interoperable and compared to the national picture. And the local change can also feed into the national monitoring through potentially covering some gaps in coverage or getting some of those early detectors of change. So the nationally coordinated schemes are really good for those long-term trends over decades. The UK-wide indicator publications and all the reporting for statutory requirements and international agreements. Local initiatives can be really good too, as an opportunity to detect signals at shorter timescales, assess early response, and also some of that data that is already collected or projects that might already be ongoing on the local change level. That information and the data collected by the voluntary sector there are currently unavailable to government. So it's also ways for us to kind of mobilize that data or open that data and make it findable and accessible and adherent to all the FAIR principles too. So we really see these as complementary. They need to be working together to provide that whole complement and that whole suite of evidence needs. It can reduce measurement lags, allow for interventions, provide context-specific data, and help track progress towards global targets. It can inform decisions and link ecological trends to specific policies and improve the effectiveness of conservation actions. So we're going to look at like a very general policy cycle also from this paper. And just taking that to think where in this cycle some of this evidence across multiple scales can start to be injected to help out. So from the agenda setting and guiding and assessing policy, to the actual policy formation, to thinking about informing investments in interventions, and then assessing the effectiveness of those interventions. If we have more data kind of on the ground to assess the effectiveness, we can then inform future investment in other interventions or pivot to different interventions as well, and so help us guide and assess policy. So thinking about all the areas where this evidence can be injected, we can kind of look at some of the examples at the broad level of the different evidence categories where this evidence might be able to come into play from the national down to the local scale. So we can look at things like national frameworks like England's Environmental Improvement Plan, which set broad goals, but also require local monitoring as essential to assess progress towards those goals within the EIP. And thinking about how local data can support more responsive place-based policy decisions. We can also look at things like decision support tools, like JNCC spatial prioritization, which can help identify most effective land management interventions. These kinds of tools also rely on data about natural capital to guide decisions at local and national levels. But the localized evidence can also ensure that interventions are context appropriate and impactful. And there's also things like scenario modeling, which again, we can run through a quick sort of hypothetical or example of a case study that's also in Len's paper, thinking about scenario modeling. So we can simulate biodiversity outcomes under different future scenarios to guide strategic planning. Again, those kinds of projections require up-to-date multi-scale data on species, habitats, and pressures. So it's another way where we can integrate those levels to get the best models possible and be able to kind of predict or project outcomes. So looking at that again with a little bit of the context provided, again, this is an appendix in that report, we can illustrate how different evidence needs interact with each other. The Biodiversity Pathways Project and case study aim to assess the potential impact of UK's 30 by 30 target on bird abundance. This was tested using different scenarios, 4 different planning scenarios to implement protected areas in the context of that UK 30 by 30 target. We used evidence from citizen science from the Breeding Birds Survey, which we partner with BTO and RSPB with, Earth observation and land cover data, as well as research on the effect size of different drivers. And that came from conservation evidence, which is a more local evidence database. So we used the kind of different planning scenarios to assess predictive species distribution models. It used both national and local scale monitoring to improve predictive power and accuracy, and really shows how integrated national and local scale data can be used to make predictions, and how up-to-date multi-scale data is really critical to that modeling. This is a single taxon case study, but the local change approach can also enable multi-taxon monitoring and co-locating monitoring, which could also provide good indicators of change in interactions between different drivers, which we review a little bit, talking about tracking the impact. So this was the Chilterns project, which I mentioned briefly at the beginning. This also included a range of different partners who funded the actual monitoring and the actual project and how that pilot operated. But JNCC also took on some of the analysis and delivered some reports, which also should be published soon from Enya O'Reilly and Ethan Workman and the rest of the team, which is great. But again, this was a way that we were using the national structured schemes and scheme protocols to then look at and monitor localized scale data across the Chilterns national landscape to produce co-located landscape scale data. So this really emphasizes the importance as well of setting those standards and using the national schemes, as it could then provide useful context for the data and for the regional data that you could then look at the national schemes and the national trends and make comparisons. So all the partners who contributed to this work and also funded it, as I said, JNCC is producing some of the reports and the analysis off the back of that. And again, showing all the potential impacts and potential benefits of this kind of approach. But again, British Trust for Ornithology, BTO, Buckinghamshire County, County Council, UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, Plant Life, Berks, Bucks and Oxen Wildlife Trust, and Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Environmental Record Centre were all partners on the project. And National Lottery Heritage Fund supported the work and funded the work that went forward, but JNCC was doing some of the reports and analysis on the other end. It really shows the benefits of working at those multiple scales and how they can work in complement. So one of the examples that we have from some of that data is looking at where the national scheme can potentially benefit and where we can also then see a potential trend emerging out of the data before it's seen or out with the comparison of the national scheme data behind it as well. So one of the potential benefits with this TTI style approach, it's possible to increase the monitoring coverage. You could get more squares, or you can potentially monitor more in more places by having more local projects going on. So you can fill gaps in coverage and strengthen the national data as well. And in the local context, then benefits from the structured, comparable, interoperable data where you can then see it in context. So one of the trends that we looked at and is in this paper is looking at the landscape scale, the yellow hammer within the Chiltern's national landscape over the number of years of data that we had. Looked like their population was increasing while potentially decreasing at a national scale. So once we have that information and we can look at that trend, we can start digging into, well, what are the interactions, or, can we find a reason why? Is it because of a particular intervention? Is it an early indicator of change across the other national indicators or across the national scale? And so you can start teasing out some of those questions and just seeing that within context. So what the TTI approach also laid out is how downscaled co-located national schemes can support a range of stakeholders and their needs, including comparing between areas with a landscape and comparing the national and regional statistics. So you can compare against the national regional statistics. You can look at different trends in both contiguous areas or non-contiguous areas and compare within areas within a landscape, which can be useful for a range of different stakeholders, as we see here. Farmer clusters, landowning and NGOs, protected areas. So it's also not just the policy groups and not just the users on the ground who are interested in their own local data necessarily. So all in all here, the UK TEPoP partners produce really robust biodiversity evidence across all range of taxa. It provides a lot of value to policy customers very efficiently through the use of citizen or community science. And what we think is really important is the early signals of change for policy responsiveness and consistency and standardization of methods for the easier uptake and easier comparison or counterfactual. Which is why we'd like to be using the methods derived from these national schemes, or why that's where we've started with a lot of our work. So we've also been seeing a lot of trends of requests for more localized data or requests for more evidence and more requests to the NGO partners too for help to set up local projects or an increased need to report national and international biodiversity targets, which has resulted in several of our goals to look at this local change or multiple scale monitoring, which really just essentially boils down to enabling that finer scale monitoring to better understand our path to nature recovery and predicting which outcomes will shift and by how much. But what do we need to do to get that off the ground and to get that unstuck and to start seeing those detections, change detection? So what are the barriers? So this is one version, simplified if you can believe, of the kind of data pathway or data flow that we want to make possible. We have a simpler version, and we also have a version of this that has all the considerations, all the roadblocks, all the stop signs, all the lost connections between it. But what we want to do is get a sense of those data flows for both the national schemes, from a monitoring site being set up, recruiting volunteers, training them, providing them with equipment, making sure you're retaining your volunteers, through the actual monitoring, through collating, verifying, validating the data, which can take a lot of time, and also expertise weighing in, and a lot of experts coming in and actually validating the information or verifying the data. But we can also rely on some new technologies for that. All the database management that goes into it, all the data storage considerations that go into it, and then also pulling that data back out to generate the trends, to generate the analysis, to inform policy. It's a lot that goes on just for the national that we want to see if, what can we do, or what pipelines already exist and what flows are there if we also have this parallel track for some of the local data, and then also how that all comes back out. The one arrow and some of the backflow arrows to kind of make it a whole cycle, how that goes back out to coordinators, goes back out to volunteers so that they can also see their contribution in context and stay engaged and motivated. So we want to look at what is it going to take to also run a local pathway with the national pathways. To some extent, you get economies of scale, but to some extent, we run into the shared challenges as well as opportunities getting those channels operating. So these are all things that we've discussed in several user workshops and with our partners to distill some common feedback on challenges and opportunities. But it gives us the starting blocks on what to work on with our scheme partners. So things like a challenge might be infrastructure for capturing data is outdated, it contains bugs, but the opportunity there is, potential injection of funds that we can look at investing in maintenance or updating the existing infrastructure. There might be trouble or feel like there's challenges recruiting even more volunteers when we already have very committed volunteers spending a lot of their time contributing to the national schemes. But this can also be addressed through connecting to that really place-based motivation and tying into kind of your local nature and local environment and things that you love, as well as not just sending in data and information for the national trends, but also being able to see what's happening in your backyard can drive some of that engagement and motivation. Doing things like automated processes, automating feedback can reduce the burden around management for partners as well. Using standard protocols and systems can mitigate concerns around data quality so that we're adhering to FAIR principles, making sure data is available to decision makers. It can also reduce the burden again on our partners by having automated processes to feedback, to run some simple analyses, and automating feedback as well as automating or having standards ready to go instead of being asked for a bespoke report or a bespoke set of survey design every time. There's things that are ready to go for those different scales, and that can be widely applied and then compared. So that's kind of our starting place and the sort of things that we've been talking to our partners about and hearing through various workshops that we've held, as well as our partners have held, and other partners in NCEA have discussed as well. And of course, another one of the opportunities there at the bottom is thinking about trialing new technologies alongside those automated processes to also help reduce those burdens and resources on things like validation and verification, another thing that we're looking at in some of these projects. So to address and tackle some of these, we've been working with our partners and across the NCEA piece of work as well to kind of pool our resources as well as our thinking on the challenges and the opportunities. And there's also various working groups and various accords pulling together behind these to pull together the stakeholders, the users, the partners to tackle these shared challenges. So hopefully there'll be more updates about that we can publish and talk about soon too. So that gives us the building blocks of what we want to do with our partners, or what we've been doing with our partners, what our partners have been doing through the NCEA and through the last couple of years. So this is kind of a partner spotlight again on the work across the UK TEPoP partners to deliver those updated apps, statistical analyses, and breaking down all the barriers in those data flows. There's several things that are ready, and so part of this conversation is to let people know what exists and what's out there, start using it, start thinking about it, start thinking about maybe field testing things that are in development. There are things that are soon to be shared and reports soon to be published and circulated. So we do want folks engaging with them and either working with us or our partners to take a look at them and hear your feedback, understand the benefits again of that standardization and the commonality and collaboration of approach. But also thinking about how opportunities exist with different landowners or different managers, different project coordinators, and how we can be launching news about that or engaging with people, as well as hearing about other methods or other species monitoring or other monitoring that exists that can help this complementary system. So our progress so far, I'm going to throw the same slide up, which is going to be even harder to read now. But just putting up alongside some examples of, again, what is the kind of work that's been going on to unstick some of these places or to make some of these flows start going. So this is really a spotlight on our partners and the delivery update on their tools, protocols, analysis, and automated processes they've been working on. We could go slide by slide for each scheme. And so, also thank you to the partners for all the work that you've done and the summaries provided and things to, make a nice shiny slide on all the work that you've done. But we do have some of the boxes here, again, where those interventions are to support all the different work. So if you're starting at the left-hand side, looking at where a project might be starting up, we've got several of the partners developing guidance or publishing guidance on how to set objectives and how to determine your survey design at the start. This, one of the JNCC reports is objective setting. This is something Natural England has been working on as well with other NCA partners on looking at that integrated survey design and what to pick based on what your questions are. That was identified as a common challenge, so something we tackled. The partners have also been updating guidance on scaling down those national protocols to local levels. Again, those should be soon to be published or out now with Bat Conservation Trust and the British Trust for Ornithology. We also already have pollinator guides ready from UKCEH and protocols like fit counts already developed or protocols that are already tailorable to a local level with UKCEH. We're also working on developing those kind of standards and criteria so we know the data will be robust enough to support evidence needs. And we have new equipment being tested, new apps being developed, new modules being launched like eSurveyor with UKCEH, plant portal development with Plant Life and BSBI, and updates to iRecord butterflies. In these apps, we can test new technologies to reduce the burden on sometimes overworked experts for validation and verification. So some of the work there includes testing AI classifiers for audio data from Bat Conservation Trust, or AI identification of moths or habitats or plants or even soils with some of the eSurveyor work. So again, we can be testing new technologies to lighten that burden and also seeing if those stand up to expert verification as well. Also providing equipment, passive acoustic monitoring from Bat Conservation Trust has been part of this, as well as developing new statistical analyses, a new ability to take that data and do an analysis and then also automate that process. So it's automatically going back out to volunteers, to project coordinators without a separate analysis having to be run every time. So while some of these data flows can add new local data alongside the national data, some of our partners are also looking at mobilizing data that already exists. Again, some of what Natural England is doing through NCEA, but BTO and butterfly conservation, again, they're on that side of the flow chart, are looking at how we might be able to derive county or regional or another geographically relevant data down from the national data sets. So, is there enough kind of statistical power there to take the national data sets and take the national trends and be able to pull something on a county or regional level, again, as a way to kind of set that context of, maybe there's a site-specific monitoring going on or a landscape scale monitoring going on. You could compare that to a wider county, a wider region, or the wider national data set. So that's a little bit of information that they're looking at pulling together, and again, should hear positive things about that soon. And then again, thinking about automating certain levels of the analysis to again reduce burdens on projects and NGO partners. So you're not pulling bespoke reports, but also running those automated analyses back out to the partners. And again, that back arrow and some of the other back arrows is really what completes that as a cycle. Having that feedback flow back to the different stakeholders easily, accessibly, having the open data encourages volunteer motivation. By providing the evidence that they've gathered, and so helps the volunteer motivation and volunteer recruitment. So looking at that as an angle, volunteer motivation is also something we've been working on. So to summarize that in a different way that maybe doesn't look so messy and it takes a while to digest, our progress to date is really in the tools and the guidance developments, new statistical survey designs like with Nightwatch from Bat Conservation Trust, as well as pulling together reports to identify opportunities for integrated biodiversity monitoring across spatial scales, also between structured and unstructured data, like we said, across that kind of spectrum. And work also through the terrestrial surveillance development and analysis work for that structured and unstructured data, and running different analysis and trial approaches like tracking the impact TTI. So lots of reports to be looking out for from JNCC and from our partners, as well as guidance and apps and other tools that can be used. And again, those national schemes or protocols adapted for local use. So just to emphasize on some of those tools and app development, especially there's some kind of mock-ups there for eSurveyor and some of the different modules there. Some of them are in development or using AI identification of habitats or of moths. And so again, just playing with that new technology. But what's really good about these and what we're thinking about with these approaches is allowing for that standardized reporting and kind of, again, the nudging along the structured to unstructured data in order to increase that biodiversity monitoring and increase that amount of data. They do aim to be inclusive, easy to use, so they can be widely adopted and deployed, and also then complementary to existing reporting schemes or complementary to a scheme or a protocol that somebody's already going out and doing, or complementary to the national picture as well. So just a couple more snapshots of that work from UKCEH on their more experimental features, and also some of the playing around and looking at AI assistance and plant and habitat classifications. So there are a good load of things available to use that we're starting to look at, and you can keep an eye out on our web pages as we publish them, get them online. Also things funneling through some of our other NCA partner work. So that's where we've gotten to from the last couple of years of funding. Some of the things we've been able to unpick, some of the areas and some of the sticking points along that data flow pathway that we're still looking at. So what are we going to do into the future? What will we keep doing? What do we want to do? Obviously, the further development of these tools and standards and processes to keep supporting the data cycle. But also engaging with opportunities to think about demonstrating the benefits of this evidence at the policy level, but also engaging with opportunities and testing at the local level and engaging with other folks who might have methods and protocols when what's available. So we obviously want to be thinking about these things, thinking about their application, thinking about picking up the tools and using them either through the standards and suggestions or suggesting, a standard for funding vehicles or different policy adoptions, or through just adopting it through landscape and sites selection, just doing your own monitoring, local monitoring. So as a final review, we do think these approaches and integrating between the national and local can support a range of users and customers, groups who could use the tools and the protocols and the reports being produced, which can help improve and increase the scope of volunteer recording, getting more people out on the ground, collecting more data. We can develop the standardized methods and protocols, making sure that they adhere to the FAIR principles so that the data is interoperable and it's open and accessible and comparable and all of those good things. And so we can also engage with stakeholders, make sure you're all aware of this work and using it as well, which is part of some of this conversation as well. And also getting other groups to, contribute their solutions or contribute your ideas, methods, data, or other things along that data pipeline, which can help unstick us. And again, thinking about enabling the production of trends at multiple scales over time and understanding the suitability of different approaches and different scales of approaches, or backing it up with other technological solutions as well. We also see some of those benefits for the policy customers, through enabling modeling and predicting outcomes, informing investment of public funds and detecting early signals of change in biodiversity trends, and also, for instance, demonstrating multiple benefits or potential impacts of addressing biodiversity through local level and community monitoring, and how we can see that either scaled up or see evidence that of that again across the policy evidence needs as well as at a national level. So just to reiterate, the national monitoring schemes are incredible. They provide a lot of really strong evidence that is used and has been used for decades and goes into all of our regulatory and statutory reporting. So they're really critical evidence for indicators and targets. We have identified several needs or several asks that have led us to the thinking locally and starting to get data trends at finer scales to be able to detect change or potentially detect signals of change earlier than on the national level and be able to kind of intervene or test things or do before or after analysis on those interventions. And so making those more possible and starting to do more of that multiple scale data collection and monitoring. We want to underscore the importance of the consistency and standardization of methods for easy uptake, comparability, interoperability, and easy comparison and counterfactual again. And again, ongoing work will see us publishing more of the resources, more of the methods, and looking to support demonstrations and sort of field testing of those different approaches. So if you're interested, part of the conversation or part of the Q&A or part of just discussion too can be thinking about how these approaches could support your priorities. Are there compelling use cases? Anyone on your teams we should be talking to, or thinking about, gaming out a case study of how different levels of data or more local data can help support evidence or help back policy approaches? Are there any priority policies or challenges that you could see this evidence being useful for or answering to? Are there kind of schemes and or funding channels where that kind of standardized approach or standardized monitoring could be helpful? And also, are you interested in using what we've developed and what the partners have developed? Are you interested in suggesting other methods or protocols, or working with us to get other lines and other monitoring outside the national monitoring that we have, national species monitoring that we have? Let us know. Do be in touch, and we're happy to talk about more ways that we can expand or demonstrate the benefits of this project. That's all I have. So I'll hand back over for Q&A.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Caroline. That was really, really interesting and a really well-timed overview of all the work you've been doing and your team and the NCA in general. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And you have generated quite a few questions. I will actually just pop the link in the chat again to the Q&A on Slido for anybody who joined us a bit late. I know sometimes, if I can, sometimes you can't see it if you join a little bit later. So yeah, we do have a few in there already though. So we'll start with one from Andy Nisbet. Can we develop this approach beyond existing species schemes to habitats, other taxa soils, etc.?
Yes, for sure. Part of the ambition there. It's definitely what was in like the realm of and sphere of influence for JNCC as part of some of this project. And again, I've been talking a lot about NCA, but obviously this local change approach does come up across TEPoP and across our other TSDA pieces of work, but it was very much the natural starting place for JNCC with the species monitoring that we have. But we are looking at other tools for the other side of the work is the Earth observation work.
I don't know why my headphones are not working.
Oh, sorry. And the habitat condition app. But yes, so and so JNCC has a lot of the relationships and a lot of the partnerships with the UK TEPoP partners for the species monitoring, but especially within NCA, we've got folks like Environment Agency and NE and Forest Research who could also then pick up or develop methods, as you said, outside of just the species or just outside of the biodiversity monitoring specifically itself to expand that to condition or a habitat condition. And again, hopefully part of the benefit of approaches like TTI or like this local change work or thinking about co-location is also maybe getting some of that inference of what are the impacts or what are the influences or interactions between things to get to ecosystem services or to the other conditions or habitat condition and ecosystem health as well. So yes, that's definitely part of the vision.
Thanks, Caroline. So moving to the next question, how do we address the fragmentation of monitoring, multiple groups monitoring the same things and not willing to share data?
Yeah, but it's part of the roadblocks and things on Catherine's. Catherine Burton has been developing our data flow after Nikki's first mapping of those data cycles between the partners. So that's something that we just have to keep conversations going and keep identifying where potentially kind of roadblocks are. But I think again, it's part of the mission of this and part of us wanting to kind of socialize it and get more engagement and awareness of it is also thinking about that. That's why the standardization we think is really important, or people using the same approach or people using the same methods and protocols, and that data is useful, interoperable, comparable across all those different multiple groups or different approaches in multiple ways. So also it's good to know and to identify what those are so we can engage with them as well, and it's not proliferation of another way of doing things.
Thanks, Caroline. We do have quite a few in the Q&A, so I'm just going to take another one before we move to hands. So what is the role of local environmental record centres, which already collate, standardise local structured, unstructured data to NBN and fair data standards?
Yes, they've been engaged in some of the those workshops and stakeholder discussions as well, and have definitely been part of the conversations again of that the data mobilization, which has been a lot of Natural England's work, and so yeah, engaging with the record centers there and looking at what's possible and what's feasible, and again, yeah, what infrastructure exists and where it sits to liberate some of the data where appropriate and where we can, or where we can feed into existing structures.
Brilliant, thanks. And Nikki's just put a comment in.
Thanks, Nikki.
Applying some of the methods from national monitoring schemes at local scale, e.g. on pollinators or plants, can also inform habitats and ecosystem services at a local scale. Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Because not everybody can access the chat, so yeah, we've had a couple of problems with that. So can local monitoring provide local trends, for example, in local planning or for nationally significant infrastructure planning?
I'm so sorry. Can you start that again? I started reading the chat.
Oh, sorry. Can local monitoring provide local trends, for example, in local planning or for nationally significant infrastructure planning?
Yes, so that's some of the things that we were thinking about how we tie into, and obviously a couple of pieces of legislation or policy coming out too that we're thinking how could this be applied or used, or these kind of standards applied. Yeah, so exactly that. It's how can we use things that might make sense then within a national picture or a national context, but yeah, it's very much the local data, and you can see the local impacts or monitor change before and after something's been implemented, or if there's then an action or a mitigation action or habitat restoration or something that's then needs to take place, that we can actually measure the impacts of that or measure the success of that, measure the effectiveness of that as well. So yeah, it's certainly an application we would be open to discussing.
Brilliant, thanks, Caroline. David, you've got your hand up. I just want to remind everyone that we are recording and we'll be uploading to the TEPoP YouTube site. So if you're happy to come on, David, and ask your question.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I couldn't access the chat. Yeah, mine was probably a question that everyone has on their mind, which is basically how you get advice on getting infrastructure funding, because for small, very busy organizations, that is quite a big barrier to knowing where and who to go to for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's so for the small organizations or small NGOs that you're saying for funding for like the infrastructure maintenance or infrastructure improvements, we're started answering. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So that's one of those things that again, in the list of challenges that comes up with the workshops, that comes up in what we discussed and comes up as one of the main barriers, and it's something that also feels like this is something that's ongoing and that we will need to be addressing, but part of that is also sometimes being tied to funding cycles, and also trying to tap into then therefore what's the wider benefit of some of this work, what is the wider benefit, and how can we demonstrate that so that we can tap into that, or we can open those channels and open those lines of communication. So it's not like there's always funds that I could point you to, but it's definitely something that's been flagged and something discussed. And again, I think working in collaboration or in these wider groups, especially for the small organizations, being in UK TEPoP and being in this kind of gives you a little bit of access, or at least a little bit of information too. But yeah, it's that kind of collaboration that we'd be hoping to tackle, that again, we could kind of collate resources, collate thinking, collate approaches, share that learning, and also be able to distribute it out. But it's definitely a big challenge, especially when it comes to the infrastructure and thinking about the database storage and management and all of that, or all the things that adding this local change pathway might imply. It's definitely things to be tackling, or again, seeing how we can are there any kind of efficiencies, or are there other kind of technological new technology solutions that we can apply to alleviate those burdens and that burden on resource too.
Do you mind if I add a small comment? For me personally, like, we're updating our system, and like knowing what the future holds and what the future requirements is quite a difficult one, because it's a new world of data collection. And trying to predict how to fund for the next 10 years is quite an interesting one. I don't know if that's come up in discussion.
Yeah, and with us as well, or exactly kind of seeing like what is the scale of this, if we're asking to do a pilot, or we want to do a pilot, or to collect a little bit of local data and see how it sits alongside, see if it's possible to integrate or not, or see if we need to hold it separately. Again, these conversations with the partners too, that we have been having, it is, well, if we do this and we say we can do it, how much more are we going to expect? And yeah, what does the future look like? How much do we need to upscale what we can do as well? And I think that also then comes down to some of the conversations or some of the realizations of, are we being asked for more of this information all the time? Is there more data that we're being asked for? Are there new angles we're being asked for? Can we get an idea of what they are, or what evidence would satisfy those things, as those kind of questions both trickle up and trickle down, so we can get a sense of like, what is the scale, or what are the new asks being made, or new evidence that's being requested, so we can get an idea of how much more storage do we need, how much more information are we going to need. We need to hold a record for every individual that's ever been seen or counted, or what does that look like? What are the practicalities of that? So definitely part of our conversations and part of our challenges.
Thanks, Caroline. And Selene has just posted in the chat, for those who can't see it, that Catherine Burton and I will be presenting at the BES conference and the CM Autumn conference on data integration from different sources. So she said, if you're attending either event and are interested, we'll cover it. If not attending, or you'd like to learn more, please get in touch. So yeah, if you want to, I was going to say post your email in the chat, but then if some people can't access it, maybe you could either contact the liaisons or Caroline to get those contact details. Right, we're going to move back to the to Slido, because we've got quite a few in here. The one at the top is quite a technical question. How do you effectively combine structured and unstructured data?
I can send you a link to the reports on that, and the technical reports, unless Nikki wants to come in and summarize. But I think that's been some of the work of TSDA as well, on looking at what are the statistical analysis or powers possible to sort of bring both to bear in evidence sets. And again, I think it's always that it depends on the context of what you're trying to bring together, but that it is possible. It has its limitations, but can also generate some interesting insights. I have, of course, closed the tab where I had that report open, but I'm sure Nikki could either post it, or again, we can share it around some of that work.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Listen, if he wants to just answer.
Great. Okay, how much do policymakers consider the data when making decisions? Will more and better data result in better decision making? That's a good question.
Well, one of the country liaisons would answer that too. Yeah, I mean, I think looking at some of this and doing this presentation and thinking about some of the approach, I think it's the classic answer that we give whenever we have some of these challenges, which is, we'll write some paper about how everything is terrible and nature is suffering, and we're not doing enough for the environment, or whatever it is. But then the solution is always just more data, and just more data. We just need more data, or we just need more evidence, but we don't know what to do, or we don't really know. We're not sure what this trend is saying. We just need more data. And I think that can be kind of open-ended and untargeted. And I think what this is also trying to do is to nail that down a little bit. We're not just saying, more data for more data's sake. We're saying, it can be this data, and it can be collected in this ways, and that will make it useful, and that will make it comparable. We'll adhere to all the fair data principles and things. So it's not just saying we're just going to go count everything for the sake of go counting everything. Actually make it useful for that evidence level. And so that's, again, some of the work that Selene's doing, and some of the conversations we're having with those country liaisons to say, what level of this evidence would be useful, so that we're collecting data that is used, and that can, change policy, or change TAC, or realize that one intervention is effective in a certain context or not. And so that we are making wise investments, and we can kind of predict what the outcomes might be, and we can make better decisions. it's kind of the, like, I'm sure we always hope that all the time, but I think it's hoping to get to that a little bit more tailored approach than just more data for more data's sake as well.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And also filling in those data gaps, I guess, and those data gaps that exist in scales, as you were talking about, you know, from local to national as well, rather than just species. So yeah. How can we best support non-experts to conduct monitoring if we're thinking about scale on protected sites and OECMs?
So a lot of this approach as well has been about you know, making sure that this is available and accessible to non-experts as well as experts. And I think that's, again, where we come into the structured and the unstructured pieces of work. Again, some of the challenges that we've talked about is, you know, how skilled these volunteers are, or how much training is necessary, or how much equipment might be necessary for our national monitoring. And so what are the, you know, accessible versions of that, or what are the things that you can do alongside that might be a little bit more open to non-experts and experts alike, and useful. So I think we're trying to design those things with that in mind, and that a lot of things might have to be kind of ready on the ground to deploy, but also thinking about having that really good evidence or really good guidance on the methods and on the protocols, which again, the partners are putting a lot of work into to make that kind of game ready, and then also testing it with potential community-based pilots, which might be ongoing with the NCEA or through other projects like TTI as well. Yeah, and then also giving guidance on just the where to start from kind of ground zero. So Len's report again, and guidance on how to set biodiversity objectives, because some folks have also said they're coming to it with we don't even know what we want to know to then know what to monitor. So helping to set out, you know, what is your objective and what is your goal, and so what should you be going out to count.
Brilliant. Thanks, Caroline. There's quite a few more questions in here. I'm not sure if we're going to get through them all.
Sorry.
No, it's good. So you've generated lots of interest, which is great. So, but we will try. So the next question is, how can we best support? Oh, we've done that one. Is there a sustainable future of monitoring that is less money, resource intensive, and less reliant on training and retraining volunteers?
Well, I have a really cheesy answer that has just popped into my head. But like, well, the beauty is in the volunteers, and they make it work, which is true. But I think looking at some of those technology new technologies is what we're looking at to potentially reduce those burdens, and thinking about, you know, what potential negative impacts of that might be, or if they are good enough as well, or comparable to either experts or training, doing the, you know, validation and verification and things. But yeah, where there might be automated processes or things like, you know, the AI processing or AI identification as well, that we can be deploying that to kind of save on costs, or, you know, not also be over reliant on people's time and resources as well.
Brilliant, thank you. The next question is, do you use any sort of statistical analysis to identify change points? I don't know if the person who put that in there would like to come on and say a bit more about that, if they're here. Or if you have an answer ready to go, Caroline.
Well, so I think my initial reaction to that is the fact that we've got probably limited data at the moment. So for this kind of local change approach, and looking at this local change, so we've got you know, the pilots or example projects like tracking the impact, which is running on 4 or 5 years of data, I want to say, and so we're, you know, only just kind of getting the data out of that to do the analysis on it now. So I would, you know, look at that, but then otherwise our work has very much been in this, like, how do we free up this data flow so that we can start collecting this data, and so we can start seeing the changes and starting to detect those changes. So yeah, there would be pieces of work where we're looking at, you know, automated processes or automated analysis to identify those inflection points or to identify when things have changed, but also TTI, which is starting to show a little bit of evidence, I think, around those, you know, what is the comparison of the yellowhammer in this local area versus the national that is starting, you know, you could actually say that, you know, there's potentially a change here or potentially something different going on here.
Great, thanks, Caroline. I think we maybe just go with one more, although we are quite close to time. But yeah, we've got 1 minute. Oh, they've all moved around. I can't see the one that was there anymore. But I think it was around how can we apply this in other countries in the UK? Oh, here we are. How could this model be implemented in other areas of the UK? Are you planning to evaluate the effectiveness of this over time?
Yes, well, we would love to. So I think that's some of the conversation also to be had. You know, the projects where we've been doing a lot of this has been England specific, but that doesn't mean that the approach is England specific, or that the other work that we've been doing across JNCC on local change is by necessity England specific either. So we would love to have those conversations of how to make it replicable. Because again, the point is it's, you know, the whole island and the whole of the UK, Northern Ireland as well, to have this kind of scale, have it comparable to the whole UK biodiversity indicator. So it makes sense to be able to roll it out across the 4 countries for sure.
Brilliant. And you're very open to people getting in touch with ideas, or if there's something similar going on in the countries that would be interesting to know about.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Caroline, and to all the TEPoP partners and to everybody who's been working on this. It's been really interesting. And thank you for coming along to the webinar today. And do keep an eye out for future TEPoP events and for future events in the Spotlight webinar series as well. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming.